This is Michelle Richards, and this is my presentation assessing Paul Levy's work on the Beth Israel Deaconess Hospital's turnaround plan. This is for Public Policy 510, and we'll be talking about the lessons learned in what to do and what not to do, as well as how some of the readings we did in class apply to this case study. So in the lessons in what to do, assertive leadership comes out on top. Paul Levy showed that he was an assertive leader at the very beginning before he even took the job. He made demands of the board and the process. He was ensuring that the board was going to reduce in size and that he would have the Hunter Group report after he took the position so that he had some time to set up how it was going to go and what they were going to use and be prepared to take on this incredibly difficult task. He was very charismatic. He was likable and had already connections with lots of people within the hospital structure, both administratively, in the teaching realm, and as well as being part of the board of directors. So that helped a lot. And his lessons, or his connections outside the hospital, including the Attorney General and some of the governmental connections that he'd made in his previous positions. He was a caring person, and that seemed to show from the outset as well. He acquired the instant reputation from the folks in the BID staff that he was honest, open, and inclusive, according to the case study. From the outset, he was an inclusive communicator. He made sure that both the BID community as well as the broad community of the area in which BID is located had a good idea of what was going on. He communicated with the whole community of BID privately inside to let them know what he was thinking, how he was going to proceed, his ethic, and I think that won him a lot of points with a lot of people right away. When they had the draft plan from the Hunter Group, he shared it with the entire internet, so everybody who worked there got it. They had over 9,000 hits of the first day of sharing it, and over 300 comments were submitted, and he did his best to address each of the comments. In later times, he would send out messages to one sub-community within BID, so the research communities or the nursing communities, to say, we know what's going on, we hear your issues and your complaints, and we want you to know that we care about you, that you're important, and that we are doing something about the things that we hear you complaining about. And he also, even though he kept communications open with the public, he maintained a tight control of that public message. Probably not quite as tight as the Obama administration has managed in their time in office, but pretty darn tight. So that people got a sense that they knew there was an issue, they knew that it was the issues were being addressed, it was more than one issue, and that they expected to turn the hospital around, and that this pillar of the community wasn't going away, but it was going to have to change in order to stay solvent. And he was honest in a lot of ways, so that was a good thing, and he kept what needed to be kept behind closed doors. And in the messaging, both inside and out, but particularly inside BID, he maintained a sense of urgency. He was clear, and he managed to message it to whatever audience he was addressing in the way that they could truly get it, which was pretty fabulous. And he also talked about how hard it would be, and it was hard. You know, he had to cut a lot of jobs, and he had to change the way the departments worked, and we'll address later some of the other changes that he had to do within structure and interfacing between pieces of BID. So he, all along, made sure that everyone knew that they were going to have to work for this, and they were going to have to work to save it. Like the instance of telling them, the Harvard teaching doctors, that if BID got sold to a private entity, that it would no longer be in Harvard's hands, was a big wake-up call to a lot of those folks. And so it was a little bit terrifying, but he couched it in a message of, we can do this, and we're going to do this, and you just need to follow my lead, and we'll work together and make it happen. So he did a really good job in the communication realm. he also focused on the hospital specialty, so some of the stuff that he did to try to turn the place around. He chose a few specialties that the hospital was well known for, that they had excelled in for years, and he probably upset some people in not including some of the other specialties, and he was willing to take the hits in unhappy people in order to do that, which is a really hard thing to do in leadership, like having the thick enough skin to make some people unhappy in order to support the broader mission that you're working to make happen. So he did a good job of assessing everything that needed to happen and narrowing in on the things that would make the hospital solvent again. He got the board out of the micromanagement tendencies, while public policy lessons that we're learning, I think, probably tend more towards government things, and you might not necessarily have a board of directors in a public management situation. You do have to make sure that, say, your senator or representative that you're working with isn't doing an end run around your leadership. So you got to clean that up, and he did within his board, which was appropriate for that organization. He made moves to strengthen the hospital and its image. For instance, the ortho doctor chief that got fired or asked to leave, he didn't get fired. And he was actually grateful that he left in the end. That helped to change something that had been a big problem for a long time within the hospital. He acquired 2 hospitals over the time of this case study, and he controlled the messaging that this was to build up each hospital and BID. So not just the hospital that they were acquiring, but it was also a good move for BID to do what it needed to do to succeed in the long run. And don't let the bastards grind you down. He had some kind of difficult situations, for instance, with the chief operating officer. He had to, in the end, let her go. He tried to do that with decorum for both of them, but she immediately went and threw the message out that she'd been fired, and didn't give him as much control over the messaging for the hospital, but also kind of messed herself up in the end when she burned a bridge for possible reference for her next job. And he also made it through the Auburn Hospital debacle, where they were in their negotiations to try to get out of the care group organization, and then at the last minute they decided that they were out. They were just going to secede from the union, and he handled that with aplomb and with really great character, and he led the group of other hospitals through authority situation without seeming to have any scarring for either BID or those other hospitals that stayed in, but it kind of made Auburn look bad in the end. I don't think he tried to make Auburn look bad, but what they did was pretty intransigent. So he did a really good job with that. The lessons in what not to do were not terribly clear in this case study. It was all Levy reporting, all Levy stuff. So, we saw a few things of emails back and forth from people. We saw a few newspaper articles in there. So there wasn't a whole lot of negative things in there. From my own perspective, handling the chief operating officer situation differently, I know he tried, or at least he said he tried, to make it work such that her style could fit within the organization, and he didn't want to lose her immediately because he had enough stuff to fix, and that losing that position that had the connections early on would have been a difficult one. However, being a female in a primarily male organization and having my own run-ins with male leadership, I kind of wonder if some of it hadn't to do with that. And while he certainly didn't highlight that that was the issue, I can only imagine that there might have been some sort of hidden sexism. So I'm hoping that that wasn't the case, but that would be the only thing that I could point out that I thought maybe there would have been a way to actually keep her on board more than what he tried to do, even though later we find out that the new COO that he hired did a great job and they wanted to keep that person on for longer. Of course, that person was a man. So again, from my feminist perspective, I have my questions about how that was handled, but I'm willing to let it go. So applicable notes from our readings. Of course, there was a lot of our readings that we could have applied here, particularly the textbook. So I'm just going to highlight a few that I picked out. He set a tough, specific set of goals that motivated people, despite the complexity that this presents in such a diverse and multi-directional organization. Like, he had doctors, he had teachers, he had nurses, he had administration, he had board, he had all these places that were in some way or another some piece of chaos that he had to rein in. So he did a really good job of pulling that together despite that complexity. In this, he, I believe, employed Locke's goal-setting theory. As our text discussed with so many different roles, as I had mentioned, and the dysfunctional culture, Levy, at least by this report, managed to turn the culture around with even some measurably good outcomes. In fact, if you look at pages 340 to 341 of our text, you'll pretty much see Levy's playbook in this situation. So I'm guessing he had some education in leadership and or public management, but he certainly applied it when he did take on this job and do it as well as he did. He managed to change the culture of the organization, which was really difficult because there's all kinds of cultures within it, and they're all pretty well steeped in that culture. So turning that around was a tough turnaround. One of the examples is the chiefs of each department being academics, and they were prone to stovepipes and silence in the face of things that they should confront. He said that they'd be in a meeting and the chiefs would be like resisting saying anything, even though he knew they were disagreeing with something. So he had to work really hard at changing how those folks communicated within those settings, and he did. Whether it was actually changing those people or changing who communicated in those situations, which is what he did. He took the chiefs out of some of those things and put in some of the underlings who were more likely to say the things that needed to be said, make the changes that needed to be made, while still consulting the chiefs and not cutting off their power. So he did a really good job of setting the tone of how interactions would go, and not just in that instance, but in every realm, and made sure that people knew his expectations and that he made sure that those expectations got met. They eventually all came around to this new practice, or they went and found some other place to be. He, to some extent, changed the structure of the organization. He decentralized some of the decision-making with his committee meetings that he would set up, and he reduced the size of the board, and he got out from underneath Care Group, which was a huge change in the way that organizations were set up. Also in our Shane reading, they talked about the issue of creating culture. I forgot to mention that, sorry, as well. He talked about corporations, but in this instance, we see that Levy saw the culture that needed to be changed and made sure that those cultural changes were made. Again, as a difficult thing as that is, as we saw, it took a change in management in the corporations in Shane's reading. In this instance, it took a change in the CEO and even the structure of Care Group and the hospitals being owned by those folks. So to summarize, Levy was brilliant at riding the precipice of one hard issue and another hard issue. Got people to come together in a sticky and difficult situation, and he was just a really great leader. I can imagine that working for him would be really a wonderful experience. Only, again, from the self-reporting that he gave us do we know this, but I suspect that he still did a good job. Even if he had some certain narcissism going on, he did a good job. And he took the other one of the things, he took the Hunter report and used it. They spent all that money, and he made sure that they didn't waste their money, but he didn't just come to the consultant's doctrine, and that made him look like a really great leader. And that is this end of my presentation. Thanks for listening.